Thanks for joining us on a road trip through rabbinic narrative. No agenda, just clarity. So I'd like to take up a Agadic passage in Gemara Shabbos Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis on 12b. It says, V'hama Rabbi Yehuda la'olam al yishal adam tzracha b'lashon Arami. Rabbi Yehuda says that a person should not formulate his requests in Aramaic. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan kol shal tzracha b'lashon Arami ein Malachei HaShareis niskaken lo. And Rabbi Yochanan explains that anyone who does formulate his requests in Aramaic, so the Malachei HaShareis are not going to attend to it. And why is that? She'ein Malachei HaShareis makiran b'lashon Arami, because the Malachei HaShareis do not recognize Aramaic. The logic of the Gemara seems to be that we require the Malachei HaShareis to accompany our requests and bring it before Hashem. But because they don't understand Aramaic, we should not formulate our requests in Aramaic so that they can understand what we're saying and bring it to Hashem. I'd like to understand what exactly this Gemara is about. If this is just a lesson in what language we should daven in, why doesn't the Gemara just say, daven in Lashon HaKodesh? What is it coming to teach us by bringing in this imagery and concept of the Malachei HaShareis? And what does it mean that the Malachei HaShareis don't understand Aramaic? Why not? Now, what's even more interesting is that the Gemara goes on to say, however, when you're making a request in front of a chola, in front of a sick person, so then the rule doesn't apply. And you can formulate your requests in Aramaic. Why? Shiny chola de shechina ima. A chola is different because the shechina is with him. What is the exception to the rule here by a chola? How does the fact that the shechina is with the chola allow us to formulate our requests in Aramaic? The Gemara doesn't seem to explain that. It's interesting that the Gemara doesn't say explicitly that because the Shekhinah is with the Chola, therefore we don't need the Malachei HaShareis anymore. It kind of just doesn't talk about the Malachei HaShareis at all. So I'm wondering, is this just an exception to the rule when making requests of Hashem? Or does it somehow fit into the whole concept that the Malachei HaShareis are illustrating for us? The pasuk the Gemara brings down to support this concept of the Shekhinah being with the Chola is also really interesting. The Gemara says, Amarav minayin sheshchina soed es hachola. So from where do we know that the Shekhinah supports the Chola, the sick person? Shnei Amar, because it says in Tehillim Perek Mem Aleph, Hashem yisadenu al eres davai. Hashem will support him on his sickbed. Okay, Hashem does a lot of things for a lot of different people. How does this teach us about the Shekhinah being with the Chola, and why should that change the rule with regards to the language of the tefillah that we use? So in order to explain this passage in the Gemara and try and understand what it could be getting at, I wanted to take a look at the Perek in Tehillim that the Gemara quotes from. As I read through this Perek in Tehillim, I realized that it isn't only talking about someone who is sick. It's describing someone who has become extremely vulnerable. For example, my foes speak evil of me. And if one comes to visit, he speaks insincerely. Together all my enemies whisper against me. They devise my harm. Pasuk Yud. Gam ish shalomi asher batachti bo uchalachmi higdila alai akev. Even my ally, in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has raised his heel to trample me. So this is a parak about someone who is extremely vulnerable, who's lost all the support systems that are normally available. And the only thing that's left is Bi'ata Hashem chaneni v'hakimeni la'asham ala. But as for you, Hashem, show me favor and raise me up. Va'ani bitumi tamachta bi, v'tatzivini lefanecha le'olam. You have supported me forever. The parak is speaking about someone who's in a situation where they can't rely on anybody else. They can't turn to anyone else for help. They can only rely on Hashem. And I think that might be the key to understanding this whole passage. Making requests of Hashem, or in general, davening, is not just something that we can do on the spot, but it requires a certain mindset. The Gemara frequently refers to it as being omed lifnei Hashem. A person has to bring himself to the mindset of being in the presence of Hashem. That is not something that we can just switch on in our everyday lives. The tefillah process is even structured to aid us to do this. When we daven Shacharis, we don't just get up and daven Shmona Esrei. We start with Psukei de Zimra, and then we have Birchos Kriya Shema and Kriya Shema. These are put in place because we need assistance going from our everyday routine mindset to being in a place where we can focus on being in Hashem's presence and making requests of Him. Maybe this is what the Gemara is portraying through the imagery of the Malachei HaShareis. We can't simply take the language and mindset of our everyday conversations and carry them unchanged into tefillah. We need something that helps orient us towards the fact that we're making a request of Hashem. Lashon HaKodesh becomes one of those vehicles. The Gemara doesn't elaborate for us why Lashon HaKodesh becomes one of those vehicles. One of the things that comes to my mind is the fact that it is the language that the Avos and our predecessors used to daven and to speak to Hashem. So Lashon HaKodesh itself becomes one of the things that helps orient us towards tefillah. Now, that is normally the case for the average person on the average day. But I think what the Gemara is pointing out is that sometimes the very situation that we're in creates the mindset automatically. And that's what I think the Gemara means, that the Chola is different because the Shechina is with him. What does it mean, Shechina imo? I think it's what the Hillam is portraying, which is that sometimes a person is thrust into a situation of being so vulnerable that he doesn't need assistance to appreciate his dependence on Hashem. Imagine visiting a family member who is gravely ill in the hospital or in hospice. The room itself already creates a certain focus. Nobody needs to be told that this is not an ordinary moment. They don't need to be guided there. They don't need to be helped there. They don't need any quote-unquote ministering angels to bring them there. And so I think that's what the Haggadah is trying to portray to us, that there are two ways to facilitate a proper mindset when making a request of Hashem. One is when we are functioning in our everyday life, in our routine. We need certain agents to help us get there. Maybe the Gemara is portraying those kinds of supports through the imagery of the Malachei HaShareis. They help bring us into the proper mindset to make a request of Hashem. But then there are also situations that thrust themselves upon us. We don't need any assistance getting to that point. Just the situation itself presents us with that mindset, with that reality. And I think that's what the Gemara is saying when it makes the exception by the Chola. When it comes to being in the presence of the Chola, so the quote-unquote Malachei HaShareis aren't needed at all. And so the issue of the limitation of Aramaic doesn't even enter the picture. It is interesting that there's another Gemara in Sota that also mentions this principle of not davening in Lashon Arami because the Malachei HaShareis don't attend to it. And there it actually makes an exception when making a request b'tzibur. The tzibur can daven in Lashon Arami and the Yachid can. I think you can hear the echoes of what we're saying in that Gemara as well. Because that Gemara seems to be saying that when someone is already a b'tzibur in a collective entity that needs to make a request of Hashem, that already in and of itself is enough for someone to be in the right mindset. And the pasuk that the Gemara quotes is also interesting. Hein el kabir velo yimas. Hashem is mighty and does not reject. It doesn't simply say that the tefillah of the tzibor is heard. It uses relational language. The tzibor is not rejected. So perhaps that Gemara is also describing a different way of standing before Hashem. Not merely because the tefillah of the tzibor is more effective, but because the tzibor stands before Hashem in a relationship in which it's not rejected. So a Gemara that looks like it's talking about Malachei HaShareis, or talking about what is the proper language to make a request of Hashem, I think is really helping us appreciate what does it mean to be in a mindset where you feel Hashem's presence enough to make a proper request and have a proper encounter with Him. Sometimes we need order, structure, and language to bring us into that awareness. And sometimes the reality of the moment has already brought us there. Thanks so much for joining us. In our next episode, we're going to take up an interesting Chazal that offer us a secret to living a very long life. Surprisingly, it seems to only entail pronouncing a certain letter for an extended period of time. See you on the next road trip.